Why would you need an engineer who specializes in nuclear technology to rescue a pilot? A weapons systems officer is a colonel. A colonel is a very high-ranking individual in the American military. So why would he participate in this operation? The Americans in this operation, they lost a lot of expensive planes. Also, we don't know who he is. He's never been identified. He was never interviewed by the press, which is unusual because if you rescue the man, you make him into a national TV star, right? 2 pilots were able to eject safely out of their plane. Now, it is the policy of the American military to leave no man behind. And this is the Americans are one of the few militaries to actually do this, where if you're behind enemy lines, they will try to rescue you. And they spent years training you on how to evade enemy captors. They'll spend a lot of resources trying to save you. And the propaganda is that this is to show you how Americans really value human life. And it's something that Americans are very proud of. But another reason why the Americans do this is this optics, which is that the Americans believe that the military is invincible. And they spend a lot of money and resources in order to create this image, this aura of invincibility and invisibility. So if the Iranians are able to capture a pilot and have him appear on Iranian TV, this is a huge propaganda win for the Iranians. Meaning that if the Americans will try your best, the Americans will try their best to save you, but they can't save you and there's a risk that the enemy will capture you, they'd rather have you killed, okay? Because they can't afford to lose this propaganda war. For the Americans, everything is optics. And as I'll show you later on, this is going to be a huge issue in this war, okay, as this war progresses. Now, there are a lot of issues with the story that's being told to us, okay? So the Americans said that they have successfully evacuated both pilots, they have saved both pilots. But the issue is this, the issue is that we know that the Americans created a makeshift landing strip, basically an airport, a small airport, 200 kilometers from where the airman actually was knocked down. So he had to hike a long way in order to get to the landing strip. Also, he was injured. I think he broke his ankle or something, okay? So that was very, very hard to do. Also, he's trying to evade enemy capture, okay? So this story doesn't really make sense. And why did the Americans decide to create a landing strip here rather than someplace closer? And why would you need 155 planes for this operation, right? Aren't you better off with just 1 or 2 to like avoid enemy fire? So this is a very strange story, but it gets weirder, okay? It turns out that the Americans basically spent a lot of resources to save the pilot. It took 48 hours, and the CIA created a lot of distractions. And the Americans spent a lot of resources to save the man while the Iranians were trying to capture him, okay? And this led to the destruction of very expensive American planes. Okay, these are called C-130, so they're transport planes. And they were destroyed in the rescue operation. Now, the American story is that these planes were caught in the sand, they couldn't lift off, so Delta Force, the commandos who are trying to save the pilot, they blew up the planes themselves, okay? And as you can see, the Americans in this operation, they lost a lot of expensive planes. The estimates are the Americans lost $300 million in planes. And even though the Americans say that there were no casualties in this rescue, we can expect that there were casualties in this rescue because a lot of planes were destroyed, okay? And again, these are very expensive planes. And throughout this war, the Americans have lost quite a few planes. The C-130 are extremely expensive, okay? All right, so this has led people to question whether or not the narrative is true or not. Now, you can make the argument that this narrative is true. You can make the argument that the American military prides itself on no man left behind, so they will do whatever they can, move heaven and earth to save that person. And that's something that the Americans take pride in. But again, there are issues with this narrative. So this is a man named Arnon Bertrand, and on Twitter, he explains that this story doesn't really make sense, okay? So the first thing is, how did a fighter jet, American fighter jet, get knocked down in Iran when the Americans have said that they have air supremacy over the country? Another issue is that the weapons systems officer is a colonel. A colonel is a very high-ranking individual in the American military. So why would he participate in this operation? That's very strange. And even though he was injured, seriously wounded, according to Trump, he still managed to hike up a 7,000-foot mountain ridgeline and hide in a crevice in the Zagros Mountains for 48 hours despite his wounds. Also, we don't know who he is. He's never been identified. He was never interviewed by the press, which is unusual because if you rescue the man, you make him into a national TV star, right? So there are a lot of issues with this story. Again, this story makes absolutely no sense. We don't understand why they had to build an airport. We don't understand how these planes got destroyed. And the fact that there are no casualties absolutely makes no sense whatsoever, okay? So maybe something else is going on. And people online are speculating that this was actually a failed ground invasion. And the mission was to sneak into Iran's nuclear power plant located in the area and steal Iran's enriched uranium, which it would need to build a nuclear weapon, okay? And by doing that, you deny the Iranians' capacity to build a nuclear weapon and you can declare a victory, okay? All right, so what's the evidence for this? Well, on March 7th, 2026, so at the beginning of this war, a journalist named Barak Ravid wrote an article in Axios, which is a Washington-based media outlet, saying that the U.S. is considering sending special forces to seize Iran's nuclear stockpile, okay? Now, Barak Ravid is famous in Washington, D.C. because he's very close with the Israelis. He himself is Israeli. So he's able to get a lot of information from the government, okay? So from March 7th onward, there was news reporting that the Americans would insert special forces to steal the uranium. No one took this seriously because it's so stupid. Are you seriously gonna send in like 100 guys into the middle of Iran and like hope they can sneak into a military base and steal that uranium and then run away? That's just retarded. No one would do that, okay? So everyone's like, this is just a psyop. This is just disinformation, okay? No one took this seriously. I didn't take this seriously at all. But then, 4 days ago, a week ago, the Washington Post leaks a Pentagon plan to do exactly that. And it's a very detailed plan that involves hundreds or thousands of troops, okay? And the idea is to build a landing strip near the power plant in order to land forces, in order to land equipment. So this is a very detailed plan. The problem, so when this first came out, again, I didn't take it seriously because this is so retarded. Are you seriously gonna build an airport by yourself in the middle of Iran and hope the Iranians don't notice? And you're gonna land 1,000 troops in the middle of mountains where they can rain missiles on you? It makes no sense whatsoever, okay? But unfortunately, if you just look at what happened this weekend, this is the plan they used. Where they sent 155 aircraft to try to create a landing strip. They sent in special forces. It was exactly the plan that Washington Post reported on, okay? But then the question is, wait a minute here. This is a top secret military plan. How did the Washington Post get this? Well, the answer is because we assume that some generals gave it to them. All right? Peter Hegseth, the Secretary of War for Donald Trump, fired the top generals for the military. And we don't know why. There was never a reason given. But we can suspect what happened was this. Donald Trump asked the generals to come up with a plan to steal the uranium. And the generals are like, let's just humor him, okay? Let's come up with this stupid, insane plan that there's no way this guy would agree to, and then we'll forget about it. They presented Donald Trump, and Donald Trump's like, this is a brilliant plan. This is a great movie. Let's do this, guys. The generals are like, oh my God, he is insane. Oh my God, we are so screwed, man. And they refuse to carry it out. So Peter Hegseth is like, well, then you're fired, okay? And then Peter Hegseth orders the new generals to execute this plan. So again, we don't know what happened. We'll never know what happened, but the evidence suggests that this might have been a failed ground invasion. Another piece of evidence to suggest that this was a failed ground invasion with the intention of stealing the uranium is that the Iranians were able to recover ID in the crash site, okay? And it turns out that this woman happens to specialize in nuclear technology, an engineer. Why would you need an engineer who specializes in nuclear technology to rescue a pilot? Right? That's kind of strange. And the Americans have done stupid things like this before, okay? So in 1980, the Americans implemented something called Operation Eagle Claw. And the idea was that at this time, the Iranians had taken hostages, American hostages in Tehran, the American embassy, okay? So Jimmy Carter, the president, authorized a rescue operation. So, but Iran was too big, so what they did was the American military set up a forward operating base in the desert, halfway between Persian Gulf and Tehran. When they landed in their base, there was a sandstorm, and a lot of their planes malfunctioned. And they recognized that, oh my God, it's really hard to go through such an operation in Iran, so we should just go home, okay? So that was 1980, when Americans were pretty sane. Unfortunately, Americans are no longer sane, okay? This is January 3rd, when the Americans swept into Venezuela and kidnapped their president Maduro, thus ending the conflict between Venezuela and America. This is great TV. The plan worked out perfectly. It showed that Delta Force was invincible. And unfortunately, Donald Trump believes this, okay? He believes that if we did this in Venezuela, we can do this in Iran. And this explains how and why Donald Trump would agree to such an insane plan as to try to build an American military base in the middle of your enemy, okay? So the main message here is that whoever is leading America, whether it's Donald Trump or other people, for whatever reason, they believe that optics is all that matters, okay? They think that reality is a movie, a Hollywood movie. And if they can script it properly, then the movie will turn out to be a wonderful, wonderful thing, okay? This is a war about optics rather than strategy. And unfortunately, this is just how America's going to fight the war from now on, okay?